when one looks at that gap, where do you think the government is falling short in terms of being able to try to provide that buffer? Because the government has announced a series of ambitious projects and programs about the amount of money it's pumped into the system, but a lot of people have broken it down, and the actual number in terms of actual cash out to the government is only just 1 or 2% of GDP. Is that enough, or is it not enough?
The government, moved decisively on several fronts in terms of the lockdown initially, but also in terms of the overall level of support that was provided both above and below the line. But again, as we've always said, we believe that India could do more on the more direct spending measures. I mean, they are at this point, I think around this fiscal year, the number was around 3.1%. The average for emerging markets was around 3.5%. But also after 3.1%, I think it was only around 2.2% that was actually put in play. So there is certainly more that we believe India can do in terms of making sure that you are helping the vulnerable, the urban poor, the unemployed in this crisis.
When you say more, give me an example in specific terms. What could that entail? Like cash?
Well, I mean,
cash yes.
Right. So specifically, what the government did do in the peak of the pandemic was provide support in kind and in cash. And then they also did expand MNREGA, which was all very useful, but all of that expired, I believe, in November of 2020.
Right.
So I think that would be there is a very strong case to extend that for 2021, given that many people are still struggling with this crisis. On both the front, they can keep the expanded MNREGA for another year. They can bring back the cash transfers for another year.
Okay. But in the event that they want to do more, and in the event that they want to be less conservative and spend more, we keep coming back to this question of how is the government going to be able to afford it. I'm sure you've seen the government's books, and revenue situation is not great. It's unlikely to get any better. So where could the government raise money from? I know that many people talk about divestment, which is privatization of government entities. But those are all long-term or mid to long-term measures, are they not, Gita Gopinath? Is there anything that the government can do more immediately?
Well, if you first look at the borrowing costs for the Indian government, if you look at 10-year borrowing interest rate costs, for instance, it is lower than it was before the pandemic because of all the monetary easing that's happened both in India and in other parts of the world. There's sufficient liquidity in the markets right now and demand for government bonds. So the borrowing costs are low. So it's not an environment where you're seeing borrowing costs shoot up, and that's part of the reason why you don't want to borrow, right? The second thing is, of course, you always give greater confidence to markets when you have a medium-term fiscal framework in place. And like you said, measures like divestments, which have been on the table for a while now, but is just not happening. I think a credible plan on that front, including in terms of raising GST collections, because there are certainly an implementation gap over there.
Right.
Both of those can give confidence, and also we have to keep in mind that some kinds of expenditure that you do now actually is good from a fiscal perspective, because you would otherwise end up with an economy that's much weaker, that is well below its potential for longer, which then just has a much more negative effect on your fiscal headline.